Hello everyone, welcome to an algebra video tutorial learning about how to factor out or find the greatest common factor if we're given a polynomial. So here we've got a binomial with two terms and we've got a trinomial with three terms, and we're going to find the greatest common factor in both of these. Alright, so let's talk about what the greatest common factor is. So the word greatest, well again, that means I'm finding the biggest of something, the greatest of something. So the greatest common, okay, common means we're looking at all the terms. So in binomial, I'm looking for what's biggest out of both of these. In the trinomial, I need to look at what's in common for all three. And I'm trying to find a factor. And again, last video we talked about a factor, or to factor something means to break it down into smaller numbers or variables or expressions that can multiply together to make the original thing. All right, so we're going to look at each of these terms. We're going to compare factors in both of these terms, and we're going to find what is the greatest factor out of both terms in the binomial, and what's the greatest common factor out of all three terms in the trinomial. All right, to start with that, let's look at the binomial 8x cubed minus 6x squared, and I want to find the greatest. So let's start with the numbers 8 and 6. What is the greatest number that divides evenly or is a factor of both 8 and 6? Well, both of them are divisible by 2, and 2 is the largest number that goes in. So I have a factor of 2. So you always start with the actual real number part, the coefficient as we call it in polynomial terms, and look at what's the factor of what's the common factor of the coefficients, and 2 is the greatest one. All right, now let's move on to the variable part. So I've got x to the third. That means I have 3 x's, right? X, x, x. And I have another 2 more x's in this one. So in common, they both have 2 x's. And if it helps, I can write it out like this, right? 8 times x times x times x. There's expanded form, that's 8x cubed, minus 6 times 2 more x's. And so what do they have in common? They both have 2 factors of x in common. All right, so let's rewrite that out. So factor of 2 x's, which I can rewrite as x squared. So in the first binomial here, the greatest common factor, GCF, is equal to, I pulled out a factor of 2 and a factor of x squared. All right, out of both of those both of those terms in the binomial, the 2x squared is a factor out of both terms. It's the greatest common factor. All right, let's move on. Let's look at a trinomial here. So we've got 5a squared b, all multiplied together, minus 20a times b squared, plus 15b to the third. So we've got multiple variables, we've got numbers, coefficients to worry about. Let's start with the 5, the 20, and the 15. What's the greatest common factor out of my numbers? So if you notice, 5, 20, and 15 are all divisible by 5, and that's the largest number. So we've got a factor of 5. All right, now let's start looking at my variables. Start with a's. So I've got a squared times an a, and the third term has no a's. Well, it has to be the greatest common factor, so out of all three terms, they don't have anything in common in terms of the variable a. So let's move on to the next variable. Out of the variable b, we've got 1b, that's b to the first power. We've got b squared, and we've got b to the third. Well, what do they have in common? Well, in common, they all have one factor of b. So we have a factor of b to the first power. There's more b's in the second term and 3 b's in the third term, but all three in common only have 1 b. So, in looking at this polynomial, the trinomial over here, the greatest common factor then over this example is just going to be 5b. That's the only factor that they all three have in common. All right, hopefully that's a helpful example for you guys as you're getting into greatest common factors and beginning to think about polynomials and factoring and taking a polynomial and breaking it down into smaller multiple expressions.